Hello people, I'm going to try and give you the rundown of what happened to me, the worst part of the tragedy when I was 16. I was a survivor of an abuse ring. I was lucky I had a relationship with two people. I wasn't just treated like meat, but this relationship became a threat to one of the people particularly, and his wife, and also his brother, who was also involved, because we were getting too close and he was talking about leaving her and moving away with me because I was 16. There were lots of powerful people involved in this ring. There were Etonians. We lived in the neighbourhood, 5 minutes away from my grandparents' house, which I stayed at, lived with them, and saw every weekend. Lived the abuser, lived 3 doctors. We regularly met at horse shows. The place I went riding was 5 minutes from his house. The actual field we took the horses to just a couple of minutes away. So we are looking at very close proximity in an isolated area where everyone used to socialise. He knew about 15 of my school friends and people I knew, people through the riding scene. His friends were friends of my parents. My grandparents knew a lot of the same people, knew the local doctors and everything. They all socialised together. I went to many parties where some were abuse parties too, and others were normal parties where the doctors and the abuser socialised. So I was becoming a problem at 16. I moved into the neighbourhood away from my family, who lived a few miles away, and it was right on the doorstep of the abuser then. I was asked to babysit. First time we'd made love in a bed at that time. I went downstairs and his wife opened the door and she attacked me with a knife from the kitchen, which was near the front door. There was a scuffle. His children came down. They were only 6 and 8. They were quite young, but they may still remember, who knows. And I was dragged into a car. There were several people, one of the local doctors, his brother, and people were there taking me into the car. Okay, it's very traumatic. I had a handkerchief, one of his handkerchiefs, tied around my neck. He put him in the front. He was in the front seat at the end because he'd come down. I said, "Where are you taking her? You're not going to kill her, are you?" And she said something like, "Dead people don't talk," or something. And I feared for my life. I had post-traumatic stress over this incident. It was a horrific incident. I counted the miles, tried to count them out miles like I did on long journeys I went with my parents, to see how far away they were taking me, where they were taking me. I couldn't work out where it was. The car doors were locked. I was held down in the back seat by his brother. I saw the gates of the place as I arrived to the Priory. I got outside and they opened the door. The doctor opened the door and said somebody would have to act as loco parentis. He was in another car, the GP friend, pretending to be my parents. And this is what some of the nurses and people in there thought. They put me to the door, dragged me to the door. Big place like my old school. It's big like an old manor house. It's a big old building like my old school. And she dragged me in, and they were talking about cutting my hair. And she said the wife said I wouldn't be so full of myself after a lobotomy. Now I don't know if they did this. This has been my dread that they did this, but it can't have been a straightforward one because it didn't show up on a CCT scan. The only thing that showed up was on an X-ray, which I had to do privately because of all the GP collusion. One of the GPs has been in the press, Dr. Stevens, for serious fraud. You can check it out. Okay, so yeah, it was to do with the dying man, if anybody wants to Google it. So these people are dodgy. One of these doctors was at an abuse party in the high street of the village where I lived. They knew a very famous Tory MP, and in fact when I mentioned the name of this person, the police stopped my recorded interview a few years ago, saying it would be continued later, and it never was. All they were interested in doing was discrediting me due to the fact that I'd had a breakdown and being under the control of the abuser in my family. They had always maintained that it was just nonsense, even though everything I had recorded, testimony of the abuser, talking about abusing me, talking about the hospital, how much was paid, etc. And I still have this tape. The tape recorder was returned to me by the police, the dictaphone non-working order. There's been corruption every step of the way. So here we go. I was in the hospital. On the right is a big heavy door. I was about, going to be taken in there. It's a doctor's office, and as you go through that door, on the left on the wall there were some old medical bottles, like antique type bottles, As you carry on further towards the right, with the window behind it was his desk, where he sat me down afterwards and saying, you know, you're quite attractive, he said, but there'll be no record of this having happened. One of the other nurses there was a Malaysian looking lady, shortish black hair, big, very big glasses. That was one thing I remember. Talked about my parents bringing me, and I said they weren't my parents. And you know, and there was another tall African nurse, male. There's a little room I was taken to. There was flooring was kind of like funny pattern on the floor. I can't remember. It was black and white, tiling type of thing. And then you go through a little way to the building. I'm not sure if there are two staircases. I think it was further behind near the back of the building, because and just before the stairs was a telephone, which I tried to run down to at the bottom of the stairs. Wrapped in a sheet later on. You're at the top of the stairs, straight ahead. There's a little tiny room with a window behind it, not much bigger than would take a single bed. I was knocked out shortly after. I don't know what they used, very quickly. And then just as you come out of that little room with a window behind you, to the left, up about 2 or 3 stairs in a very narrow corridor, because they found it very hard to bring the stretcher through. As you climb up those 2 stairs, slightly to the right is another room, slightly bigger. It's quite light in the room, and they laid me there on the stretcher with a strange machine on this side, which seemed to be at some points monitoring what was going on with areas of the brain and stuff. I was tied down on the stretcher somehow, and they did, and I was sort of semi-conscious. I remember them vaguely doing a reflex on my leg to see if my leg would jump when they touched the knee. We were waiting for quite a long time for the doctor to arrive, and I was terrified, obviously, and he had some kind of a Dutch sounding name. Now I can only run you through the bits that I vaguely remember now. The abuser's brother was, well, he'd also abused me, was standing in front talking through my sexual history. Who was the first person, and I had to answer. Otherwise real horrible pain was administered, and then I have still got the scar here to prove what they did to me on the squamosal suture, which is a very thin area. So I was talked through with the doctor standing straight kind of here, that I wouldn't go and see them again, that, you know, what I remembered about my earliest sexual history, and then fear of pain. Real horrible pain, not the kind of pain that you'd normally ever experience, because it was internal. And the scars that I was left with were about a centimetre, stitches, and it's shrunk down to about half a centimetre scar now. It's still visible. My son's dad helped me shave it off a few years ago, so you can see it. I had it x-rayed privately, because obviously going to the local doctors telling them about this would be a little tricky, because I'm in a small village and these doctors are very interconnected. They still know each other. So, yeah, I still have a scar, and it's been somebody on social media, a professional radiologist, has given me a very in-depth opinion about what it is on the squamosal suture, and it's invasive, and he's seen similar through gunshot wounds. So basically there was an invasive element to this, obviously, because I had a little bandage here, and as I was down at the bottom of the stairs, the little Malaysian nurse was trying to walk me around the garden, so I was like zombified. And I couldn't concentrate for several years properly, and she said, don't remove it, don't remove that. I was eventually taken back to my parents' house. As I said, I can remember different places of this. I think it had just been done up. There were fireplaces to the, as you look at the front of the building where I went in to the right, little fireplaces in separate rooms, and in the centre was a funny dining room. I can't remember much else. I didn't see much more of the building. I said I was returned to my grandparents' house. I gauge time, 2-3 days later. My head was rolling on the sheets like that, and I wasn't dressed properly. And my grandmother said, "Oh, you've been ill. We'll have to, you know, try to get better," sort of thing. And I went into the bathroom and saw the stitches, and you know, after a week or 2, 3, 4, they disappeared, and my hair grew back very quickly. It was only a small area that was cut, and because I was just so out of it, and I had, you know, kind of an aversion to even thinking about it. Every time I came close to thinking about any of it, I'd just go like that, and it would go, and it would go. So this is obviously what they designed to happen, you know, and that plus the trauma of it to prevent me from doing anything. Plus I was just so zombified for several years afterwards. I couldn't really work properly. I couldn't really do anything. I did try an au pair job. I had to leave home because my parents all moved house, and they were all very conspiratorial, my grandparents and everything. Like things covered up. I was never wanted. They were a very abusive family. So eventually, so I did come back, leave home, come back a few times, and then when I started getting flashbacks at 19, they had me sectioned. A few years later, I had another minor breakdown, and the Hill End Hospital, which is now being dealt with under Operation Meadow for serious child abuse, sexual abuse, and abuse over medicating, which they did to me, to the point where I could, almost collapsed at times, put on 3 stone in weight in 6 months. So it's a very abusive environment with the doctors and things that were going on in my neighbourhood, not just with the local doctors sorting it out for their friend, the abuser. It was going on widespread, but the police are not interested at all. My family were Freemasons, powerful. The people involved are too important. So as I say, I'm left with this now, and I'm going to stop there because I know it's a lot for you to take in. But I think some people get confused about what happened to me because I don't like straight talking about it. I've got many bows to my arrow, many strings to my bow, and I keep forging forward with my learning and my understanding. And of course, I believe in God and great, ways of thinking, and I've studied, the psychology of it all just to get my head straight about life, relationships, people, identity. I've spent a long time thinking when I regained, my ability to be able to think and very much outside of the box. So I want you people to understand me a little better in case I'm silenced, why I do what I do, and thank you for listening.